Hi, welcome back to another session on language acquisition. In the previous video, we talked about the stages that children go through in order to acquire a language. Not only can we talk about language acquisition in terms of stages, but we can also talk about the different modules of language, the different components of the language, like how phonology is acquired, how morphology is acquired, how syntax is acquired. So when talking about the stages, we take the language as a whole, but in today's video, we are going to divide language into its components and look at what happens in learning the different units of different modules of language, of different components of language. That is what happens in phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. How do children learn these different components of language? So the first thing, we start with phonology. Children first acquire a set of sounds that you can see in all world languages, and this is irrespective of the language that is spoken in their surrounding. Then later, little by little, they learn the less common sounds. For example, a sound like p, like m, like t, k, g. They are the first sounds that children all over the world acquire. And mama, baba, these are the first sequences that are produced. Then later they would learn fricatives, and among the fricatives, those that are common would be learned first, and those that are rare would be learned later. For example, th is the last sound that would be acquired in English. If we want to talk about the order of acquisition of sounds, we can talk about two basic classes of sounds that are vowels and consonants. And vowels are learned first, because in order to create vowels, they do not have to make a certain gesture. So with their mouth open in different degrees and the place of the tongue, they can create different vowels. So vowels are learned first. Then come consonants. And within consonants, those that have the common manners of articulation would be learned first, then the less common. And for the place, again, those with lips are learned first, then come those that are more complex. So nasals, for manner of articulation, nasals are learned first, like m, n, ng. And the reason is because for their production, the child can make experiments with the velum, raising it and lowering it and then closing the mouth. They can create nasals, and n is the first nasal that appears. Then glides, ye, we. They are very similar to vowels. They are approximants. Then stops, like p, b, t, d, k, g. Then liquids like r, and you might have heard that children up to year 3, they have not yet learned liquids, and they could not produce liquids accurately. Then come fricatives. Some of the fricatives are learned first, and as you will see later, it's also dependent on something else, that's frequency. And aggregates are the last to be learned. For place of articulation, they start with labials like p, b, m, and you can think of what you have heard from the babies, like what have been the first words, the first sequences that they have produced, and you'd see that in them you can see traces of m, b, and p. Then come velars, k, g, m, alveolars, t, d, s, z, and palatals come last. So there is one thing about sounds in world languages that overrides these rules that we talked about. And that's the distribution of sounds and their frequency. So if a sound has a complete distribution so that it comes both at the beginning of a syllable and at the end of a syllable, and in the middle place between two vowels in the middle of a word, then they would be learned first, compared to a sound that comes only in the last position or in the first position. And also frequency. Frequency means the number of times a sound occurs in a language. Like how many words have that language. If many words have a certain sound, then that would be learned first. And it's important that those words would be frequent and they would be among those words that children would learn first. For example, v, which is a fricative labiodental, is acquired very late, but in Estonian, Bulgarian, and Swedish, it's one of the first, and it's very common. The reason is because it is used in many words that are used by children. We have already talked about it, that children would perceive or comprehend many morphological contrasts that they cannot produce. That is, what they perceive and what they comprehend are more than what they can produce. Their production lags behind their comprehension. Do we have any evidence? Yes, from experiments. So they had some children who produced rabbit instead of rabbit. Then they wanted to see if they know the sound r, or they do not know the sound r, and they do not make a distinction between r and w. Contrast. So what did they do? They perform an experiment with pictures for wing and ring, and then they produce, for example, a ring. What the child did was looking at the picture for ring. This is the technique we talked about, preferential listening technique. So they looked at the picture that was for a ring. And based on the experiment and the other stimuli, they realized that however children cannot produce contrast, cannot produce some of the sounds, but it doesn't mean that they do not know them and they do not comprehend them, but that they cannot pronounce them. And evidence also comes from diaries, parental diaries. For example, a linguist has made a recording that his son was saying, rather than saying light, said yite. And if anybody told him, oh, you want me to turn on the yacht, he would become angry by saying, no, no, not yite, yite. So even the time that they are producing it, like yite, they are saying the correct thing as they know it, but then their production is way behind their comprehension, and therefore what we hear is a mispronunciation of that sound. If we look at what children produce, we can find out that it is rule governed. For example, let's have a look at these pronunciations from a child. How spoon is produced? Pun. Plain, pain. Kiss, tis. Cow, cow. Clean, tin. Stroller, polar. Bottle, baba. Bed, bear. Michael, Michael. Diaper, diaper. Poppy, potty. Mommy, money. Bird, bird. Big bird, bird. Water, wawa. Cake, cake. So, what's happening? In a spoon, what do we have? We have a deletion of one of the sounds in the consonant cluster. That is, we have reduction. One sound is deleted, it is reduced. A consonant cluster, a sequence of two consonants, is reduced to one sound. That's the same for plain, that the consonant cluster is reduced and it is made simplified. And kiss, tis, kowtow, what do we have? We have substitution. And if we look at this substitution, we see that whenever there's been any k sound, it's been changed. For example, in Michael, Michael. And in clean, so first, the reduction, the consonant cluster reduction has happened. It has been simplified. Clean to keen, and then to tin. Here in stroller, again we have simplifying the consonant cluster to one sound, and then the replacement of t with p. Do we have any other case of this replacement? Yes. And poppy, and it's pronounced potty, or a diaper, pronounced as diter. So one other thing is baba for bottle and waba for water. What do we have here? We have the repetition of one syllable, which is ba, and bottle, baba, and for water, wawa. And you are familiar with this morphological rule, which is reduplication. So reduplication is used here. And we have deletion. For example, in bed and cake, one sound at the end is deleted, be-ke. And we have deletion in consonant clusters as well. There is another thing that has happened, and that's devoicing. For example, Bert and bird, they are pronounced the same way as Bert. So you see that the rules that children follow in their production, in their pronunciation, they are the same as what we can see in adult language. In our pronunciations, we make use of all of these phonological rules. And children, in their pronunciation, they use the same rules. These are UG rules, rules of universal grammar, that are at the disposal of children, that children would use them in order to produce speech. So therefore, we can make the conclusion that children's rules conform to the possibilities that are there in the universal grammar provided by the universal grammar. So now about semantics. How is the meaning acquired? There are two general processes in semantic acquisition. One is extending, broadening a word meaning to refer to words, to many words, more than what is intended by that word. For example, papa or a daddy, which has the limited meaning of father, its meaning would be broadened, would be extended to all men. Or a dog, which has a limited meaning in order to refer to one animal, one type of animal, it would be used to refer to any animal. Or in Persian, I have heard some children use GG, and they mean this GG to refer to anything that is animate and is an animal. So any animal, whatever, would be referred to by GG, and it can be a bird, it can be a fly, it can be a goat, it can be a dog, it can be a cat. In any case, that would be GG up to the time that any one of them would have their own name. So this is overextension. They overextend one word to refer to a broad scope of meaning, to more objects than it is intended by that word. It can also be the case that they use underextension so that what they would learn for one thing would be treated as if it is a proper noun. For example, if they learn the word dog, they would just use it to refer to their family pet rather than being the name of a type of animal, and it can encompass all of the other animals. They would treat it as if it is a proper noun. Or this GG might be used only to a pet family rather than referring to other birds, for example. And well, when I was talking about the word that they use in order to refer to objects, we should also add that at the beginning, the words that they would use might be somehow arbitrary, like the words that they would use in order to refer to things, but then after a time, they would follow what the labels that are conventionally provided for objects, like what the adults would use. But this process of using a word as if it is a proper noun for the family pet rather than for all the dogs is under extension, narrowing the word meaning to a restrictive meaning, narrowing it down to certain object rather than using it as a label for the category of objects that it refers to. So it might be also questionable that how come children determine what is a word's meaning, or how do they attach labels to objects? How do they know that when they are referring to something and they call it dog, it refers to the whole of it rather than to parts of it? Or that it refers to, when we say ball, it refers to the shape of that rather than to its color. Or when we look at our overextension, we see that if they are overextending based on some features like shape, size, rather than based on color. So, one of the principles that children use in order to learn the meaning of a word is form over color principle. If they are told to call something a word, that would refer to their shape, to their size, rather than color. They attach it to size, shape, rather than color. They won't take it for color. They learn colors later. And we have another principle, whole object principle, that children use and that makes learning the meaning of words easier. That when you refer to an object by a certain word like door, they know that it is used to refer to the whole of it rather than to the handle of it. Or if you say table, it refers to the whole thing rather than to its legs. So we have this whole object principle as facilitating learning the meaning of words. When they use a word, they use it as a label for the whole word rather than for its parts or for its features. Syntactic bootstrapping is another strategy that children would use in order to learn the meaning of words. How? Well, words would appear in syntactic environments, and they learn the meaning of words, for example, verbs, based on the syntactic structure in which they occur. Think of this sentence, which has non-words. John blipped Mary the gloom. John blipped Mary the gloom. Or John gonged that Mary will come. So, based on this structure in which it is used in John blipped Mary the gloom, well, we make a guess that it would be something like give sell, something in which the possession of one object is changing from from John to Mary, like what we have in give. Or in this sentence, John going that Mary. So here, that Mary will not come, going would be similar to something like realized, recognized, thought. So words like that. So therefore, children get clues from the context in which sentences, in which words are used. They would get clues from the sentences, the context in which they are used, in order to know their meaning, to learn their meaning. This is syntactic bootstrapping, using information from syntax in order to learn semantics. What about morphology? How do they learn morphology? Well, one aspect of morphology that has been interesting for researchers have been how do children acquire irregular forms? What are the stages in acquiring morphological forms? For example, when they want to learn, he went to school. How do they relate that to go and know that it is the past form of go? And why is it, how do they start? How do they proceed? And where do they end in acquiring irregular forms? Based on the studies that have been done, children start with the correct form, which is phase 1. And they would say, he went to school, or he bought the book. Or, and in the same way that they would use play and played and break and broke, they would be the same. Right? They play, they played. They break the window. They broke the window. So in all of these, every verb would be treated as a separate lexical entry. Then comes phase 2. In phase 2, they learn the rule in order to form past tense, and they mistakenly use it for making past tense for break as well, which is irregular, which requires an irregular form. So they would say, they play, they played, they break the window, they break the window. The wrong form will be used at this stage due to overgeneralization. They learn the rule of past tense formation and they apply it to all of the verbs. And they do not know that there are exceptions. Or in case of go went, so they start from this stage that they use correct form. And then they go to stage 2 that they overgeneralize and they would say he go to school. And then comes the last stage in which they learn the exceptions. They know that there are exceptions to the rules and therefore they would use the correct forms. So It is at the stage 3 that we can say they have the morphological knowledge about past form, and that they are using the correct form consciously, but they know what is the correct form, and they know the exceptions, and they know the rules. Another question for researchers was whether children have morphophonemic knowledge. That is, when they are using morphemes, do they pay attention to their phonological rules, to the phonological rules that apply? For example, when we are adding to box, we add a, boxes. When we are adding plural s to book, it would be box. But when we are adding to wing or to bag, it would be bags, wings. So in order to study that, they had a series of pictures like this in order to study whether they have morphophonemic knowledge, that they would change the phonological shape of sounds based on the context in which they are used. They used drawings like what you see here. For example, this drawing for wog, and it said this is a wog. So now there is another one. There are two of them. There are two, and then they would answer with the plural form of wog. So the form that they used was that they paid attention to change the plural morpheme to z, to use z for plural morpheme. But if the picture was the word big, for example, here you had, this is a big. Now there is another one. There are two of them. There are two bigs. So then, because k is a voiceless sound, the plural morpheme becomes similar to that through assimilation, if you remember it from previous semester, that we had assimilation. In assimilation, two sounds become similar to each other, like what we have in shanbe, shambe. So here, the two sounds become similar. What are those two sounds? Plural morpheme, which is said to be z in the basis, would change to a voiceless sound when it is near a voiceless sound. And it would remain voiced if it is after a voiced consonant. So therefore we have wogs and bigs. And children followed this rule, this morphophonemic rule, and they produce wogs and bigs. Based on this test, they could say that children have morphophonemic knowledge. Also, the studies have shown that children have a knowledge of inflectional morphology. For example, they would not make any agreement error. If in any language gender is a feature, like in German, they would not make agreement errors related to gender. Or in Arabic, they have gender and they have number, different numbers. For singular, plural, and dual, and masculine and feminine, they do not make agreement errors. So therefore, based on their findings, we do not have any igos pronunciation, igos production in English. Why? Because in that case, goes does not agree with I, and this is ungrammatical. So they wouldn't say I goes. However, it can be the case that at the beginning they would use only one form for all of the persons, he, she, I. They would use go, but then they learn the inflectional morphology, and for she and he they would use goes rather than for I, that would lead to ungrammatical production. Or in French, they would not produce la ballon, but they would produce le ballon, and they observe the gender agreement of French. Children also have a knowledge of derivational morphology, and that's evident in the novel words that they make. A case of making new words is what we have here, that the scale is used as a verb. And zero conversion is applied by the child by saying you have to scale it, and they meant you have to weigh it. So compounding is also one of the morphological processes that you can see in children production. In Persian, one child produced Asemansor for Sursure, and Zeytun Angoshtari for Zeytun Parvarde. So the children therefore have knowledge of words, and they create new words before they learn the words that adults are using by convention. As I told you earlier, that shows this arbitrary aspect to word meaning relationship, to word form and meaning relationship, that the relationship between word form and its meaning is not something natural, but it is by convention. Before children learn those conventions, they would start attaching labels to things, and they create new words, but then they follow what has been used conventionally by the adult. So, about syntax. How do they learn syntax? So when we were talking about the stages in language acquisition, actually we stopped at holophrastic stage, and that is the stage at which the children have already learned a lot, and it's only 2 more stages for them to go to have a full mastery of the language. In holophrastic stage, what happens is that they use one word, but the adults who are in contact with children, they know that they mean something more complex, something like a sentence. They say just one word, but they mean what can be conveyed by a sentence. So what does it tell us? It tells us that they have a knowledge of syntactic rules, and their syntactic competence is ahead of their production, is ahead of their performance. Their competence, their linguistic knowledge is ahead of their performance. Their performance lags behind the linguistic knowledge or the competence that they have in language. And we have evidence for this from the same technique, preferential listening technique. So in this experiment that we are going to talk about, the children sat on the lap of their parents and they watched some videos. And if the video matched the sentence that they heard, they would look at that longer. For example, if they had sentences like John hit Mary, Mary hit John, that you have the same structure, the same word, only word order is different. So in listening to these pictures, they listened to the picture that matched the sentence. They looked at the video that matched the sentence. So therefore, however, there's only a word order difference to tell them about the syntactic differences between these two sentences, and they didn't have any different words, or they didn't have anything else that would help them to find the meaning of the sentence, except that they should know that order is important in English, and that order would lead, the change in order would lead to different interpretation. Based on this performance, this looking preference that they would look longer at the video that matched the sentence they heard, we know that they have a more complex syntactic knowledge compared to what they produce. They produce one word, but they know more than that. And also in the same studies, they have realized, they have found that children as old as 18 months, they could distinguish between subject and object WH questions. So if they have been shown two videos, and in one video it was that the boy was hitting something, and another video about something hitting the boy, so they would play these two sentences, one of these two sentences, like what is the boy hitting? They would look at that video in which the boy was hitting something. And if they said this sentence, they played this sentence, what hit the boy? They would look at that picture that something hits the boy. So therefore, based on preferential listening technique, the researchers have found that they have more knowledge of syntactic rules compared to what they produce. They produce one word, but they have a more knowledge, more syntactic knowledge compared to that. After holophrastic stage, that they produce one word and they mean one sentence, comes two-word stage. In a two-word stage, they produce sentences with two words, and they have clear syntactic and semantic relations. For example, in All Gone Suck, Hi Mommy, these are the productions of children at two-word stage. Bye Bye Boat, All Gone Sticky, More Wet, It Bowl, Catherine Sock, Dirty Sock. So they have clear syntactic and semantic relations. In All Gone Suck, well, it means that all of the socks are gone, there are no socks, and the relation between all gone and sock is that all gone modifies sock, like dirty sock. Or for more wet, it's clear, or for Catherine, sock, also it shows the possession of it, and it ball might be referring to it that it is a ball. So here they have a clear relationship, these words, and they are aware of that, and they would use it. Then comes the multi-word or telegraphic speech. And multi-word or telegraphic stage or speech, what we have is that we have utterances that are mostly composed of content words. For example, like what we have here, cat stand-up table. So here we have mostly content words. Sometimes the function words, like auxiliaries, inflections, are missing. Like what we have here, we do not know what's it that can stand up table, what is the relationship, but the adults who are in contact with them, we might interpret it as the cat is standing on the table, or it can be it can be a request that the cat should be put on the table, or in this sentence, Cathy built house, so inflection on morpheme is missing again. Cathy builds house. And here, show mommy that, show that to mommy. So 2 is missing, and then there is a change in word order. However, whatever we have in their production is that they follow the hierarchical structure of the adult grammar, and they use the same syntactic rules that we can see in adult English language. For example, that we have WH question at the beginning of a sentence, or that we have subject at the beginning of the sentence, or here that cat is the subject, however they is missing, or a is missing, the article is missing, but we know that it is the subject, or here and house, so the article is missing, but we know what's the relationship between Cathy, build, and house, and that house is the object, and they follow the same hierarchical structure that we have in English, that we have built house, which is a VP made up of a V and NP, and then we have the sentence IP that we have NP and VP within that. And also here for right truck, can be that the pronoun is missing, but if it is not missing, then it is imperative, and it doesn't matter whether the subject is missing and it's he, she, or they. And if it is imperative, what we have here is that we have a V, and after that we have an NP, and we have V NP. Or here, like all the double object structures, we have like give mommy the book. Here we have show mommy and that. So the question, based on these experiments that show that performance of children lag behind their comprehension, their linguistic knowledge. The question is, why do they omit functional morphemes? Is it because they are not able to produce it, or is it because their grammar would let them to leave some of the elements like functional morphemes to go unexpressed? So two accounts are there. One is performance limitations account, and they say since there is an upper limit to what they can produce, children would delete, would omit those morphemes that are not that much important to comprehension, and they would leave the content words that they deem as important for comprehension. So based on this view, however, they are not able to produce it, but they can make a distinction between what is important and what is less important, and what can be left out and what should be expressed in order for their sentences to be comprehended. Another account says that, well, children are going through an early stage of language development, and this stage is similar to what we can see in adult languages. For example, in Spanish, in Italian, in Persian, subject pronouns can be dropped, can be deleted, and that is what's happening when they are producing sentences with the subjects deleted. Or there are many languages that they do not have determiners. For example, Chinese do not have determiners, or Persian doesn't have a determiner like they, and therefore when a child is producing a sentence without a determiner, they are producing a language, they are producing sentences like an existing adult language, which shows an earlier stage to their own ambient language. So it's as if they go through stages, and at the earlier stages we have languages like Spanish, like Italian, and at later stages we have a language like English that has pronouns to be expressed obligatory. This is called an early grammatical stage account. Is there a way to measure syntactic progress? Well, there have been several ways proposed. One is chronological age. But researchers have found that this is not a good basis in order to measure syntactic progress, and the reason is because children mature at different rates. They mature at different ages. Therefore, we cannot take chronological age as the basis. Another measurement is mean length of utterance. That is, the average length of utterances that the child produces. How many morphemes do they produce? So they would make a recording of the utterances that they would produce, for example, at age 2 and 5 months, and they would count the morphemes in each utterance, and they would divide it by the number of utterances that they have produced in order to arrive at mean length of utterances. For example, boys would be then 2 morphemes. how many morphemes do they produce in each utterance. They would count the number of morphemes and they would divide it by the number of utterances that they would produce in order to arrive at what is the mean length of utterance. It has been said that MLU, or mean length of utterance, is good for English, but not for all languages. And when we want to compare languages with different morphological systems, we should have a measurement that would not be sensitive to one to morphology, a morphological system of different languages. And what do is that they count the number of verbs per 100 utterances in order to arrive at verb per utterance. So therefore, a measurement that does not include morphological system specifics and would be used for all languages for comparing children acquiring different languages is verb per utterance, VPU, verb per utterance. Now, the question is, how do children learn syntax? One way is semantic bootstrapping. That is, they use the meaning of words in order to figure out what is its category. For example, if the word refers to a physical object, it's a noun. Or they might use a heuristic like this, that if a word refers to an action, it's a verb. However, if we want to look at it from the adult perspective, we have verbs like know, that they do not refer to an action, but they refer to state. And we say that well, semantic bootstrapping cannot be used. This is what we do as adults, but as children that we are going to learn our first words, we can use this. So therefore, this mechanism is helpful at the early stages of learning syntax. However, at later stages, they would use more complex heuristics and strategies like word frames. What are word frames? Word frames are structures like the one, for example, the big one, the red one. So this is a frame in order to learn adjectives. Or you saw it, you give it, you put it. So these frames that occur frequently, they are used in order to categorize words into verbs, adjectives, and they help children to determine which word refers to the category noun and which word refers to the category verb and which one refers to category adjective. The most frequent frames are the ones with determiners like the, that when they see this, they know that this is a constituent, a noun phrase, or when they have pronouns like it, one, then they know that before one, you might have an adjective, and they can use it, for example, because they know the object. And they know that it is used for that object. So whatever comes before that would be the verb, and they would use it in order to learn the verbs. And in order to see whether children have an understanding of these function words, they used imperatives with grammatically well-formed structures like found the bird, and ungrammatically positioned function words like find was bird. And children paid attention to those particular function words and responded to that. And they responded to the appropriate grammatical commands rather than to those that were not grammatical. What does it tell us? It tells us that they pay attention to the words that are in each sentence, and they have a knowledge of what are the function morphemes, and they respond to that. And it's not only the prosody of the sentence that they respond to. However, they do not produce functional morphemes and function words like you, it, there, but they have a knowledge of that, and they show this knowledge in how they respond to grammatical structures compared to ungrammatical structures. So around age 2 and 6 months to 3 and 6 months, well, we see that children are learning language very rapidly. So they develop something like a fully fledged grammar by that age. And beyond age 4, you can see that much of the adult grammar has been acquired by children. But what about pragmatics? That is, using language in use. Language in use. And here, the function of the language is important. We adults, when we use pronouns, we have a clear understanding of what the interlocutor knows, and we pay attention to the needs of the interlocutors, and therefore we would not use any pronoun without reference. But this doesn't happen in children. For example, you might hear them saying, "He hit me," but then you would not be able to find out who he was. It's not easy to find the reference of the pronoun he. And it's because they take it for granted that the grown-ups, the adult, would know the reference of he by just using it. It seems as if they are using he in a similar way to a proper noun. And they ignore, or they are not conscious, they are not aware that their interlocutors really need that the referent would be established for them in order to be interpreting that successfully. So they are not sensitive to the needs of those they talk to. In younger children, they have difficulty in shifting reference. For example, they use "you want to take a walk" when they want to say "I want to take a walk." And you know that these are deictic words, and deictic words, they have their reference from the situation, and a personal deictic like I, you, it is dependent on speaker addressee. And they are not able to shift the reference so that they know you refers to addressee and I refers to speaker. When they use articles, again, they do not show a pragmatic awareness of when to use them. Whenever we grown-ups use definite article, we use it for something that has already been mentioned, and we are talking about an object for which we have a common ground. And for any word that is newly introduced, we do not use a definite article there, the definite article there. However, children would use that for introducing new reference. And again, like the way they use pronouns, here they have this assumption that the listener knows what they are talking about. However, they have not established it in a linguistically appropriate way, the way that they have not established the referent of the pronoun. Implicatures are very difficult for children to interpret. For example, the experimenters have shown children a picture in which a mouse is fond of eating vegetables, and then that mouse picks up all of the carrots. And there is one animation that tells the child that the mouse picked up some of the carrots. When the experimenter asked the children whether that was true, they said yes. However, in answering this question, an adult would say no, the mouse picked up all of the carrots. In interpreting quantifiers, they would use the weaker interpretation and what is more logical rather than what can be comprehended through making inferences. When it comes to speech acts, they master speech acts very early, as it is evident in using one word and they mean different things. For example, using up and meaning that the teddy is up on the shelf as a statement to give information, or for pick me up or put it up there. So then they know about the illocutionary force of the sentences that they use. They would use one word utterance, but then they use it to perform different speech acts. They are sensitive to what language should be used in any certain situation. When they are speaking to a bilingual person and the children themselves are bilingual, then they would code switch. But if the one they are talking to is monolingual, then they would not switch between their two languages, and they will keep with the language that they know and their interlocutor knows. So this shows that even if they are young, they are very young, but they are sensitive to what is the appropriate language to be used when they are talking to a bilingual like themselves. This happens in bilingual children. So the question is still there, that how is it that children are learning the language very fast and they make uniform progress in their language acquisition? We said that part of that answer comes from principles that are genetically wired in children. When they are born, they are not born as a blank slate, but they are born with language faculty. Another part of that, so those were principles, the rules that are shared by all world languages. But besides what are shared by all languages, there are some features or structures that are specific to some languages and they are not used in other languages. That there are differences between languages. For example, that there are differences between Persian and English in the order of adjective and noun, or in the order of verb and object. In English, a verb comes first and then comes the object. In Persian, the object comes first and then the verb comes. So the idea is that, however, we have universal stages of language development, but the way the children are acquiring language is shaped by the particular language they are exposed to. And besides the principles of UG, we have certain parameters. And these parameters, they give options to children to choose from. And since we have a limited set of choices, therefore, the children would not have a difficult task. They have to set the parameter to yes or no. For example, when they want to learn the language, there is a parameter about the subject, whether the subject can be dropped or not. In Italian, Spanish, Persian, the parameter says drop the subject, yes to subject dropping. But in English, it says no to subject dropping. So the parameter is set to yes for Persian, Italian, Spanish, and to no for English. Some of UG parameters are whether the head of a phrase should come first or last. For example, in a VO, whether verb, which is the head of the verb phrase, comes first, as in English, that it comes first and then the complement comes, or like Persian or Japanese, that first the object comes, then the verb comes, which would be head last. So English is head first, Persian is head last. Also, about verb movement, in some languages, in order to make a question, the main verb moves to the beginning of the sentence and the sentence becomes a question. We form a question. It becomes interrogative by moving the main verb to the initial position in a sentence. But in English, the verb cannot move. The auxiliary should be moved in order to change it into a question, to form a question. So this is also a parameter then. Parameters would reduce the burden of learning a new language, and this is another reason for why children are learning the language easily and rapidly. So part of the explanation for the ease and rapidity of language acquisition comes from principles of UG that are shared by all world languages, and some part of it comes from parameters that we have a limited set of choices and the children would choose among them. And how do children do that? they use the linguistic data that they are exposed to, and they extract what are the underlying rules and what are the parameter settings in their language, and they would use it. So we talked about how do children do it, and we said they would do it based on the language they are exposed to. Based on this, we might say that there are different views about the role of linguistic environment. Based on innateness hypothesis, we say children are born with language faculty, with UG principles and UG parameters, and UG parameters are set as a result of exposure to different languages. So the linguistic environment is there to help children to set the parameter. But there is an account, and this account has been there before the mentalist approach of the innateness hypothesis put forward by Chomsky, and that is behaviorism. Based on behaviorism, children learn the language through imitation, reinforcements, and analogy. Behaviorism focuses on what can be observed, the behavior that can be observed as people are doing it, and it ignores the mental system that is behind and underlying these behaviors. Based on this approach, we are born like a blank slate, and then as we are exposed to more and more language, we imitate, and our behaviors are positively reinforced or negatively reinforced, and we learn them, and we use analogy in order to learn language. As such, language is therefore a kind of verbal behavior, something that children can learn it through imitation, through enforcement, through analogy, and similar processes. The scholar that has put forward behaviorism first has been Pavlov, and then related to language, Skinner has a book, Verbal Behavior. This book came under attack by Chomsky in a review on verbal behavior. But what does it say? It says, language learning is like learning any other behavior that we can learn through imitation, reinforcement, and analogy. Is imitation the way children learn the language? In order to answer that, let's go through this exchange between child and adult. The child says, my teacher held the baby rabbits and we patted them. Did you say your teacher held the baby rabbits? Yes. What did you say she did? She held the baby rabbits and we patted them. Did you say she held them tightly? No, she held them loosely. So you see, however, the adult is going to use a recast in order to show the child the correct use of the verb, the past form held, but the child, since is in the second stage that overgeneralizes, adding ed for past transformation, is ignoring the corrections made by the parent. and would continue using what the child is capable of producing at that level, at that stage of grammar development. So therefore, based on this, we can say even when children imitate, they cannot produce the sentences outside the rules of the grammar they have developed so far. If they have not learned the exception, if they have not arrived at the third stage in morphological acquisition, then they would not be able to use the correct form of irregular verb held. And children, as you can see, they ignore corrections. Also, if we want to take imitation as the account to explain how children acquire language, we would not be able to account for the performance of those children who have some neurological deficits or physiological deficits, like cleft palate, for example. These children, when they overcome their speech impairment, when they do not have physiological deficits anymore, they immediately use language for speaking, saying that it's not because they have not been able to imitate language, they do not produce the language then after they do not have these deficits anymore. They learn the language, they have it, and the moment this deficit is gone, they are able to use the language. And it is opposite to what Skinner says, that language is a verbal behavior. If it was a verbal behavior when they do not have physiological deficit, they should not be able to produce language, but they can immediately use language for speaking. At the time that they could not produce the language, it's been just because of those obstacles. And when the obstacles are gone, they can produce language. In behaviorism, positive reinforcement was another strategy to learn the language. But is it really the way that children learn the language? Is it through reinforcement that children learn the language? Researchers have observed parents, and they have realized that parents seldom correct their children, and if they do it, it's not for the ungrammatical sentences that they have produced, but that they correct them for their mispronunciations or for incorrect reporting of facts. That is for content of their message. If their content is not correct, then they would correct the content rather than the grammar. The grammar would go unnoticed, would be left to the children to correct them as they are learning the language. We are very tolerant towards children when they make mistakes. Sometimes parents are using recast in order to correct the child and in order to correct them in an implicit way, in an indirect way. So recasts are good, they are helpful, they provide a correct model for children, but when researchers have looked at when recasts are used, they have realized that parents not only use recast for ungrammatical sentences, but that they have used it for grammatical sentences. And the focus has been in all of these recasts has been on the content rather than on the form of what the children have said. And many ungrammatical sentences slip by. So therefore, positive reinforcement is not a technique through which children would learn the language, because parents seldom give reinforcements for grammar. What they reinforce is the correct reporting of facts or the correct pronunciation. What about analogy? Can we say that children learn the language through analogy, that they look at how adults are putting the words together in order to form phrases and sentences, and by analogy they use that as a model to form other sentences? Well, it's true when they generalize from particular instances in order to arrive at a general rule, but the thing is that they must know when this rule works and when it does not work, because sometimes it doesn't work and it leads to sentences that are ungrammatical in the language. In order to make it clear, let's read the following together. By analogy, the child can say, I painted a blue barn. That's exactly the kind of theory that we want. You hear a sample and you extend it to all of the new cases by similarity. In addition to I painted a red barn, you might also hear the sentence I painted a barn red. So it looks as if you take those last two words and switch their order. So now you want to extend this to the case of seeing, because you want to look at barns instead of paint them. So you have heard, I saw a red barn. Now you try by analogy a new sentence. I saw a barn red. Something's gone wrong. This is an analogy, but the analogy didn't work. It is not a sentence of English. So you see, if the child wants to learn the structure that can be used by paint, I painted a blue barn, and they can hear a sentence like this, I painted a red barn, I painted a barn red. So both sentences are okay, and if based on these two sentences they want to make an analogy and create sentences with saw with a similar structure, well, they would have I saw a red barn. That's okay. But what about I saw a barn red? This is not a grammatical sentence in English. Analogy didn't work in this case. So you see, it's good when it is used in order to generalize from specific cases in order to arrive at a rule, like what we have in generalization of morphological rules, but it doesn't work all the time. And if the child wants to learn through analogy, they should know when it works and when it does not work. There's another theory about the role of linguistic environment that gives a lot of importance again to linguistic environment, to the input that they get from parents and caregivers. Based on this approach, children are able to learn language. Why? Because adults are speaking to them in a special language. And this language is simplified. How is it called? Motherese, child-directed speech, or baby talk. Based on this hypothesis, environment has a significant role in facilitating language acquisition. And it is in contrast with the innateness hypothesis that says, well, the children are born with language faculty and the environment only provides the data in order to bring the language about, to give form to the language. But here, the environment is important in order to learn a language. What are the characteristics of mothers? Well, when you are speaking to a child, you speak more slowly and clearly. We use a higher pitch. There is an exaggeration of intonation. And grammatical sentences, fully and generally grammatical sentences are used. We overdo the production of sentences. We use complete grammatical sentences. The findings have shown that children's overall language development is not significantly affected by the use of child-directed speech or mothers, because we have cultures in which they do not use a speech style that is specific in talking to children, and there are communities in which they do not talk to babies at all, that they regard them as objects and they do not see them as worthy of being a conversation partner. So, based on what we have said so far about the role of linguistic environment, we have behaviorism that says language is a behavior and it is learned through imitation of what they hear, reinforcement of parents, that they would be punished if they do not produce the correct structures, and they would be reinforced, they would be given support for the times that they produce the language correctly, grammatically, and that they use a strategy like analogy in order to learn the language. And we went through that and we found that what we see in a child is something that cannot be learned through imitation and through analogy, but that they have more than what we can see in the environment. If you remember the poverty of the stimulus argument, that the data the child is exposed to is impoverished. And another account is that children learn the language because adults are speaking to children in a simplified, special way. And the research has shown that we have children who are brought up in families and cultures that they are not talked to, but in spite of that, they have learned the language. And we have the innateness hypothesis that says we are born with language faculty, and we would learn the language we are exposed to with ease and rapidity because the rules are genetically wired. We are born with UG principles and parameters. Principles are shared by all world languages, and parameters are set for any specific language we are exposed